Welcome to the 11 Warriors show for Friday, October 25th, 2024. I'm Jason Priestis. That's Chris Lauterbach. Got our dude Dan Hope joining us on the show today. Dan, I hear you bought a car recently?
Yeah, just last night. It was time. I'd been had my ever car for about 10 years, so it was time for something new. So good to have that taken care of, and now get ready for another weekend of Ohio State football.
I see Chris over there shaking his head because he thinks all cars should go 30 years at least. Like, I kind of admire his car philosophy. I do. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, I'm not a big I don't like going to the dealership and dealing with that either. I still have a 2010 Honda Accord, Dan. It's still cranking 185,000, something like that. And yeah, I keep threatening to get a new car, but I haven't yet. But I also don't make 11 Warriors Dan Hope salary. I know you probably got a Dan Bergini. I just have an Accord.
Dan Bergini, just 50 cent looped on the stereo. Chris, what are you trying to get? How many miles? You trying to get 250? What's your goal?
Actually, I'm just waiting until the spring. Like, I just, if I can get this thing through the winter, that kind of deal. I really want to see what a 2025 4Runner looks like when they come out. Like, I've seen them like online, like, prototype type stuff, but I don't want to drive one. Once that happens, yeah, I might pull the trigger on something. But yeah, I was all hell bent to do it this summer, then this fall, and now I'm saying this spring. So who knows?
Pour one out for the Honda when it finally comes. Big show today. Ohio State's attitude coming off a loss and a bye, how they're thinking as they head into the matchup with Nebraska. Speaking of the Cornhuskers, more than you could ever want to know about that team, a full scouting report and keys to the game. We're going to roast Michigan for a good long time, as is our custom, and why this football season continues to shape up as one for the ages. Let's start at the top, man. They've had the Buckeyes, that first loss of the season in Eugene 2 weeks ago. 32-31, heartbreaker. There's the recriminations and everything else that you expected along the way. And, everything's still in front of them, though. And they've been, kind of keying on that. They, look at ESPN's playoff prediction model. They have an 80% odds of making the CFP, almost 20% odds of winning it all. They're the number one ranked team in SP Plus right now, thanks to Texas getting throttled by Georgia last weekend. But at the same time, man, the defense was exposed a bit, and Cody Simon said he felt the pressure and the blame. And beyond him, you've got to wonder about a guy like Denzel Burke and how he responds. Ryan Day said there were conversations, between the staff about possibly putting Jermaine Matthews in for Burke when he was struggling. Kind of lit up in that game, gave up 8 for 179 and 2 touchdowns, just like what you did not expect to see guys out of a future first-round draft pick, or so we thought.
Yeah, I mean, I said it before the season that, I thought Denzel Burke was the best player on the team. So I kind of thought maybe I should delete some of those takes out of my old podcasts after that game because, I'm sure that, that some people thought about that and go, man, what was that idiot Dan thinking saying this guy's a, future first round pick. But, I still think Denzel's a good player. I think he had a really bad night. I think he will bounce back. I think he is built to bounce back. I mean, no question here. That's somebody who is going to be under a microscope here as the second half of the season begins because, it was a rough night. I mean, there's no way of spinning it. I mean, there was a rough night. I mean, his play in that game is not the reason they lost, but it is certainly a reason why they lost that game. And so, he's got to respond. And I mean, really, the whole defense has to respond. I mean, you think about what this defense is supposed to be, the amount of talent it has. This is just not a defense, simply put, that should ever give up 500 yards in a game. Like, it shouldn't. There's just too much talent for that to happen. And so certainly a lot of work back on the drawing board here in these past 2 weeks. And, tomorrow against Nebraska may not be the biggest test of that, but it'll at least be a start to see, do we see some new concepts from that side of the ball? Can they start to get momentum back going into another really big test next week against Penn State?
Yeah, and Chris, they had last week off. No one basically spoke to the media in the week after the Oregon loss, but guy spoke this week, and Will Howard was asked about that game in which, he played a really solid game, slipped up a bit at the end, one that will probably haunt him for a bit, but here's what he had to say.
And, we talked about we wanted to flush that game, but we're not going to forget about it, and it's going to be in the back of our head. And, we're going to use it. And I feel like this is kind of the point of the season where, I'm almost glad it happened now and not at the end of the season to where, some of those issues that, may have gotten swept under the rug. If we win that game, they have to get addressed. And, we're really working at, cleaning up every little thing that we can. And I want to be able to look back and say, this is the reason that we went on a run and won a national championship.
I love hearing that Chris, I don't know about you. What are your immediate thoughts to that quote?
Yeah. I mean, speaking of Will Howard specifically, I mean, his performance in that game, I know people can, face the pain of the last drive all they want, but Will Howard actually made me more confident in his ability to lead this team than less confident with his performance at Oregon. There's a lot of things on that last drive that I don't think you can hang directly on him. But the fact that, it sounds like he's speaking, you've heard a lot of the other guys say the same thing. I'm sure, Dan has seen it all week at practice of where they're trying to make sure this loss means something right now. It's all lip service to say, learn from this and, blah, blah, blah. But it does feel like the team is, kind of galvanized to say like, hey, we're letting our margin for error go here a little bit. So we've got to tighten things up. And I think, they're doing and saying everything you would want in response to a loss, just like Day's doing the same thing.
Yeah, Dan, you were with the team, all week, basically a few times over at the WAC for media availability, talk to Day, talk to players. What kind of vibe did you get from the team this week?
I think there's a realization that in this 12-team playoff world that, they still control their own destiny here. They don't, they know that they have a lot that they need to work on, and they've worked very hard the last 2 weeks to try to fix those things. But I also don't think there's a sense of despair necessarily, because they realize that, hey, if we win the rest of our regular season games, we'll get back to the Big Ten championship game. We'll get another shot at Oregon. We'll make the college football playoff. And so I think they've certainly, I think, last week in particular was a hard week, a lot of soul searching for the team to try to figure out what went wrong and what do we need to do better. But now I think it's turned the page. It's hey, we've still got everything in front of us. We can't continue to dwell on that loss anymore. Like, I think Will Howard said after the game, like, you can't let them beat you twice. The loss is happened. You have to learn from it, but you can't now let any bad feelings from that game seep into your play. You got to go out there playing, hey, we can still accomplish all our goals this season. It's just that extra sense of urgency, because now you don't have that mulligan anymore. You've used that mulligan, so you've got to now go win. The goal is to win 7 weeks in a row here if you include the Big Ten championship game.
Yeah, Chris, with that said, do you think there's less pressure now with one loss? More pressure?
I don't. I think there's infinitely more pressure. I mean, you could still, potentially get in as a 2-loss, but you don't want to play that. You don't want to play that game. I mean, if you still control your destiny, you don't want to lose control of your destiny, right? So no, to me, I think there's more pressure, without a doubt. I mean, point blank. Dan, do you feel any differently?
No, I totally agree with you, because like I said, I think what you knew going into the season, I mean, nobody was ever going to admit it because you want to run the table. But, I think you knew going into this season, you could afford one loss. Like you said, I think Ohio State could lose a second game and probably still make the college football playoff, but you don't want to play that game. And you do know at this point, a second loss will take you out of a Big Ten championship game. And that's one of the 3 big goals. So I absolutely think the pressure's ratcheted up. And I personally think, I don't know how much people want to hear this, but I personally think this loss in some ways could prove to be a blessing in disguise, because it makes you really bite down, during that bye week and say, okay, we need to get better in these areas or this is going to happen to us again. I mean, you think back to the last time Ohio State won a national championship in 2014. They had that awful loss to Virginia Tech in the second week of the season, and then that kind of galvanized them the rest of the way. So now I think the hope is you respond the same way that team did 10 years ago, and you really use that to bite down and say, okay, now we can't lose. So, it certainly adds more pressure, but, should also add that sense of urgency.
We spoke about Burke in that game and some of the struggles defensively for the Buckeyes against Oregon. Dylan Gabriel had a heck of a game, seemed to almost do what he wanted back there in the pocket. Last week, Nick Saban was on the Pat McAfee show and was asked about the Ohio State-Oregon game. And here's what he had to say about the defense.
And then the way that Oregon just, sort of picked Ohio State apart. They didn't affect the quarterback in any way. And
he had time.
And he had time, but they didn't ever pressure.
Yeah,
exactly. It was just 4 guys rush, which, that's kind of an antiquated way to play defense. And I'm not being critical of somebody's philosophy at Ohio State, but, there's so much 4-man rush, simulated pressure, still able to play the coverages that you play, drop different people, rush somebody that is supposed to be dropping, drop somebody that's supposed to be rushing. And these things are ways to get pressure without giving up anything.
Yeah.
And coverage. And I think in this day and age of football, you got to go down that road a little bit, or you're going to be behind the.
First of all, I love that Saban is just going around shitting on teams like with no abandon, because like he's the guy you gotta listen to, and your entire fan base is gonna be like, Saban said that, you got to better do what he said.
It's free, yeah, it's free coaching, it's free consult, it's free consult, right?
Yeah, like Mike Gundy loses his job or retires, and he goes on CBS or something. People are like, oh yeah, Mike Gundy said that. Nick Saban says it. The whole fan base is like, look what he said. Do that, So this adds a whole nother complexity layer to the game. But it's been kind of whispered for a long time that there may be some friction between Larry Johnson on the defensive line and Jim Knowles as the defensive coordinator. One guy's in theory the boss. The other guy is massive tenure, incredible reputation, has been, in the game forever. One of the giants of defensive line coaching in American football history. And the thought is that maybe, Knowles is trying to do some stuff, but got pushback from Johnson on what he wanted to do. The jack position's something that people talk about. And Day actually had a quote about that saying, was asked this week, he said, I know there was a point early on when Jim got here about the jack and things there. That's interesting. And went on to say, I've watched closely, and I think they're both on the same page. But it's our job as coaches to make sure we're putting everybody on the same page to be successful. I think that's happened in the last week. And that kind of goes to Dan's point, Chris, about, you've got to bite down. You don't have this room for error anymore. And it's almost disheartening to me, and I'm a pretty positive Ohio State fan, but it's almost disheartening to me, Chris, that it's like, I think they're on the same page now. We've had some conversations like, why are you doing it now? Like, what's going on, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, it's one of those things when you're getting by, maybe you don't realize as much that it's something you need to fix or address, right? It's just like, one of those things that you're working around. Your wife never empties a dishwasher, but you deal with it. Right? It's, it's just one of those things, right? So I wonder how much of that it is. But to, Dan's point, when a loss does happen, then when you really start looking at everything, and by the way, the greatest ever do, it's calling out something about it, then, this bye week is such a blessing. Because, it's not just about stewing over a loss. It's about addressing what contributed to the loss. And you actually have a full week to do that instead of 2 days, because now you're game planning for the next opponent, right? So I think Day talked about it a lot this week of some different things they think they might do up front. And as much as that loss, everybody just belabors a loss, and rightfully so, right? But the defense gave up 10 points in the second half. It looked a lot better in the second half. They played a lot less man coverage in the second half and didn't give up quite as many, big plays. So I'm not saying, everything's great, but it's not like they didn't make adjustments at halftime and actually perform better in the second half as a defense, because they actually did. That still wasn't enough. So now, hey, what else are you going to tweak so that you're ready the next time you play a true matchup game?
Yeah, Dan, some other interesting stuff from Day. He said he had, quote, hard conversations on the defensive side of the ball last week. Also had this quote, which I thought was super interesting. Said, I think we have the right people in the right spots. Then it comes down to scheme. I think we can put some guys in some better situations. And that seems like it's kind of directly addressing the Knowles Johnson stuff, right?
I think so. I think that's exactly at least how I interpreted it. Maybe he kind of let some things slide in the first half of a season of, maybe Larry wanting things a certain way or Jim wanting things a certain way or whatever. And I think these past 2 weeks, I think he was in there in a defensive meeting room saying, no, we got to start doing stuff like this. We have to change things. So I think, whatever the arrangement was between Jim Knowles and Larry Johnson on how they were going to do things from a pass rush perspective, I think Day was in the room the past 2 weeks telling him, no, this isn't working. We got to fix it. So that's how I read between the lines of everything Day said about that this week. And to Chris's point, like, it almost goes back to top of a show. Like, you could make the analogy to that of like, you drive that old car, and as long as it's getting by, you just think you can keep driving it. When it's like, oh, this thing like might break down, like then you go get a new car. So I think you can kind of draw that analogy to a this of like, yeah, it was working fine. Like, going into that Oregon game, the Ohio State defense was number 1 in the country in total in scoring defense. And so they could easily justify that, hey, this is all working, even though like, I think we could probably all see going into that Oregon game, like the pass defense didn't quite look like the behemoth it was supposed to be. It just hadn't really been tested by anybody. But you could look at the stats and easily justify and say, hey, what we're doing is working. But then a performance like that happens, and now the whole world knows it's not working. And so you got to go back, and you can't, Jim Knowles or Larry Johnson or whoever's deciding the pass rush scheme can't go to Ryan Day after that performance and say, no, we think this is best. If he thinks, hey, we need to do something different, you're going to do something different because it didn't work.
Faith it gets fixed from both of you.
I'm pretty optimistic. I mean, you just look at this defense. I mean, there's too much talent for this defense not to be one of the best in the country. I mean, all the pieces are there personnel wise. Obviously, there's the question mark right now about Lathan Ransom and how much time he might miss at that strong safety spot. But I mean, you just look at who that starting 11 is. I mean, this should be the best defense in the country. It's not right now, but do I think it can still get there? Yeah, because I think, the talent is there. I think, all these coaches are smart guys. They should be able to put their heads together and figure out how to make it work schematically. Because if you can't make it work with this group, then, there's probably something bigger going on.
Yeah, I agree. I also think people need to understand what fixed can look like. I mean, the Ohio State-Georgia game that Ohio State lost by a point. How many points did Georgia give up? They give up a lot of points, right? If it was just a little bit different, one play goes Ohio State's way, everybody's going to be questioning Georgia's defense, even though they still gave up over 40 points in that game. So I think, it's about getting those stops when you need them, making those big plays. I do think there'll be some schematic changes. One thing I will say is that, and I don't think I'm just reacting to a loss, but, a lot of these guys came back and, you want to believe it's camaraderie and this, and I think that's a huge piece of it. But I think a lot of these guys also, too, did not have the seasons last year they thought they were going to have, and therefore their draft stock wasn't quite as good. How much of that is, hey, maybe these guys, I'm not saying they're not great players. I think they are really good. But is some of these guys maybe just not as good as we have them, in our minds, and then therefore you need to make sure your scheme's on point because you are not quite as elite as maybe we think some of these guys are. I mean, Burke was great his freshman year. He was not great his sophomore year. It's not like a bad game from him as some like, oh my God, I can't believe it. Like he's had these before. Maybe not to that degree, but he's obviously had some, less than stellar performances. I think you can say the same thing in the defensive ends. We were touting Sawyer the last 6 games of last year. The first 6, I don't think we were doing that. So I think it is scheme for sure, but I think some of these players, the coaches are never going to say it, but I think some of these guys got to step up.
Yep, some injuries the team is dealing with right now. Offensive tackle Josh Simmons hurt in the Oregon game. We all kind of suspected it was the case, but he is out for the season with a knee injury. Hello, Zen Mahalski played adequately. Hopefully we'll get better. That's a tough spot to fill in. And question for me right now is there a chance that maybe Simmons returns for 2025 now? Because this is a guy who last year probably not going to be a high draft pick. This season was trending, hey, this guy might go in the first round. He's playing left tackle for a really good team and playing it really well. Does this injury affect his math at all?
That's something I've wondered the last couple of weeks, because I think if you had asked me 2 weeks ago if there was any chance Josh Simmons was coming back next year, I would have said absolutely not. Because, like you said, I mean, there was a piece that Dane Brugler for The Athletic wrote before the game. It was ranking the top 30 draft prospects in that Ohio State-Oregon game. There were a lot of them, and he was ranked number 2. And that just shows you how much his stock has risen over the course of this year. And so I think if he had played the whole season the way he played the first half of the year, he had a chance to be a first-round draft pick. But now you think about it, okay, if we assume this is a torn ACL type injury, something that could keep him, sidelined for 9 months to a year, that would sideline him for the entire pre-draft process. So, I think he has good reason to consider coming back for another year. And boy, that would sure be welcome for Ohio State, especially after they missed out on David Sanders Jr.
Yeah, for sure. Chris, Lathan Ransom dinged up in practice as well. Source told 11 Warriors he left last week with a foot injury during bye week prep. Ryan Day says he's day-to-day, but we know that sometimes what Day says with injuries is not true, and I think that's fair. That's totally his prerogative to do that. How soon do you expect him back? And I know that's kind of like just a guessing game. And who do you like back there in his spot for when he's out?
Yeah, as far as when he's back, I mean, that's classic Day, right? Which he doesn't have to say anything else. You're absolutely right. I'm not cranky at him for saying day to day, but aren't we all? I mean, I think that without knowing anything about the extent of the injury, my guess is he's 100%. I'm 100% confident he's not going to play this week because you don't need him to win this week. And then next week it's maybe, hey, let's see how warmups go, and then that kind of thing, and see what happens. But I wouldn't be surprised if he misses a couple weeks because we really don't know exactly what's going on right now. But I feel very confident that he won't play Saturday or play tomorrow. But as far as who replace him, I mean, initially he was like, hey, Jalen McClain, Malik Hartford, those guys got to step up. By midweek, it was Lorenzo Styles is getting some reps back there. You've heard some other people surmise Jordan Hancock maybe could be back there. Considering it's Nebraska, and I personally don't have any fear of Nebraska, I hope it's Jalen McLean because I want to see more of him. I want to see him get some reps, but I don't know, I got a funny feeling I think it'll be by committee on Saturday, but I think you're probably going to see Styles get some run. Lorenzo Styles get some run back there too. But I'm hoping it's Jalen McLean because he really impressed me in the spring with what limited we got to see. And like I said, I think they can put just about anybody back there on Saturday and still have enough to beat Nebraska.
Yeah, McLean gang as well. Two other small injuries. Judkins had a hand procedure during the bye week. OSU does not believe, or Day said at least he didn't believe the injury led to the fumble against Oregon. Quinshon's first fumble since 2022.
First lost fumble, at least, yeah.
First lost fumble, my bad. Said he's good and thinks like he's feeling better than right now than before the Oregon game, so good to hear. And tight end Will Kacmarek is out for a while, according to Day, quotes there, a while, whatever that could be, after injuring his arm in Oregon. So it doesn't sound like we'll see him again until late season. If
it's probably 2 years in Day speak. Yeah,
a while is 2 years. Yeah. Day to day is like 2 months. Yeah, you got to figure this stuff out. Fun stuff on 11warriors.com this week. The midseason Buckeye 20 rankings come out. Dan, I know you put a lot of work into spearheading our efforts with that. It's essentially just ranking the 20 best players on Ohio State's team. You get the 11 Warriors writers to vote on it, submit their top 20 ballots to you. And new number 1, Jeremiah Smith, shoots all the way up to number 1 on the list. He was 9 in our preseason Buckeye 20, which is, I want to say kind of still a good ranking for a freshman that hadn't played. Like I remember seeing it, I was like, well, I hope he's as good as we think he is, because we thought he was going to be, but like still 9th. Number 1 right now. Rest of the top 10, number 2, Caleb Downs. It's safeties, Caleb Downs. He was previously number 1, so fell 1. You got Ibuka at 3, Tyleek at 4, Travion 5, Quinshon at 6, Will Howard at number 7. He's up from 16. Lathan Ransom at number 8. He's up again. Number 9, Seth McLaughlin, center, is up 11 spots from number 20, the biggest riser in the rankings. Josh Simmons, the tackle, who's now out for the season, is number 10. Big fallers this week. Number 11, Jack Sawyer, was down from number 3 in our preseason rankings. And cornerback Denzel Burke is 13th now. He was 2 in our preseason Buckeye 20, the dubious honor of biggest faller from preseason to midseason. Any of these surprise you, Dan?
Not really. I mean, I think, with guys like Denzel and Jack and, JT was right in between those guys. I mean, it was not good timing for the voting for them because it came off a game where, Burke got torched in the secondary and they didn't have any sacks. So, I think, that certainly weighed a lot into the voting, but it also should, because Oregon was by far the biggest game of the first half of the season. So that was why I didn't feel bad about doing the rankings at that point, even though I knew like they might get weighed maybe a little much for those guys, because ultimately, the Oregon game is the game you get measured on. You don't get measured by how well you play against Akron or Western Michigan or Marshall. You get measured by how you play in the big games. And so I think, for those 3 guys in particular, all falling down the rankings, it's a matter of, hey, do they step up against Penn State? Do they step up against Indiana, which we're now talking about as a big game for Ohio State in the second half of the season? Those guys can easily move back up the rankings if they perform the way we think they should be able to in those games, but they've got to go prove it in those big games. And so, I think that's why all of those guys, fell out of a top 10. I mean, I think for the guys who jumped up, I mean, I totally agree with Will Howard jumping up. I mean, everybody, who listened to me on podcasts during the summer knows I had my reservations about Will Howard, but, I think he's really shown me in this first half of the season that, Ohio State absolutely made the right move, bringing him in to be its starting quarterback. I think he's done an excellent job. I mean, same thing you talk about Seth McLaughlin, biggest riser. I mean, he's a guy that, when Ohio State brought him in, I mean, he just barely made our top 20 because a lot of people were like, this guy, he almost lost the Rose Bowl for Alabama with these bad snaps. Like, what is Ohio State doing here? And he's totally proven why Ohio State brought him in, being a midseason All-American at center. I mean, I had people telling me he should be higher on the list. So, I think, those 2 in particular, and, Josh Simmons, honestly, if Josh Simmons had hadn't been hurt, he probably would have been ranked higher. So, it's unfortunate for him that, he has that season-ending injury. But, all three of those guys certainly deserving of their rises. And Jeremiah Smith, I mean, you guys remember, I said it before in the spring, like, this guy might be the best player on the team. Now, I wasn't comfortable saying that before the season because, again, like you said, he hadn't played a game. Like, putting him 9 before the season when he hadn't even played a game felt bold. But now it doesn't feel bold to even put him number 1 because he's just been that good.
Chris, who'd you have number 1?
I still had Caleb Dowd's number 1. I had Smith too, but I toiled with it. I really did. I think, we've talked about it in previous shows when we had Kyle on and some others. I mean, these guys are both so good, but I still had Downs number 1, but I could have been talked into Jeremiah. I will say real quick, just on a lot of those defenders falling that you talked about into the teens, I think, some of it is bias, timing, recency bias or whatever, but I think some of it is just a lot of these offensive guys have outperformed what the expectation was, right? So some of it is by default that they slid. I know for me, when I was doing my ranking, it's almost identical to what the top 15 are in our composite. And I wasn't so much trying to hate on, Sawyer or Burke or whatever. It was Howard has to be higher. McLaughlin has to be higher. Simmons has to be higher, especially in the offensive line. I mean, that was the biggest question mark that I think any reasonable person had about this team. And those two have been the 2 best offensive linemen by far.
Dan, who'd you have 1?
I had Jeremiah Smith.
I did too. I had him 1, Ekbuka 2, and Downs 3.
I had Downs 2, Ibuka 3.
Yeah, I mean, that's the top 3 that it's hard to, you can move them all around. I think at this point, Ibuka's played really well. As good as Smith's played, I mean, Emeka's been fantastic too. Been, the clutch guy that Will looks to when he needs something, and fun to watch, man, for sure. The Nebraska Cornhuskers invade Ohio Stadium this weekend for a matchup with the number 4 Buckeyes. It's the 112th homecoming game for Ohio State. Archie Griffin, the Grand Marshal of the parade. Love to see that. OSU is asking fans to scarlet out the stadium, which is a fun thing to do when the other team will try to wear red to an away game because it's going to make the photo look even better. And prior to the game,
like when remember in Indiana they would wait for Ohio State to come there, and that's when they would take their media guide overhead shot of the stadium, so it'd be sold out and everybody's in red.
If you zoom in, you can see a lot of scarlet and gray. But
I have to worry about that now with Siggs, but
he's cooking from far away. It's it all looks the same. The 11 Dubgate 12 also this weekend kicks off at 9 a.m. right behind the Varsity Club. It's a fun time. Come check it out. There's food, beer vendors, non-alcoholic drink vendors. The Dubgate is 11-0 all time in games following the tailgate. Money raised will go to a great cause with Olentangy Special Olympics. And should also point out Dubgate's also 7-0 against ranked teams. I mean, there's some games in there we had no business, winning. Like, I think Wisconsin that year when Braxton chucked it was a Dubgate
11,
game. A big noon game. It's on Fox. Line is OSU minus 25.5. It opened slightly lower than that, so it's moved about a point. Perfect weather, 0 chance of rain, 58 degrees, slight breeze. Got Matt Rule coming to town. I don't know what you guys feel about the guy, but he's a decent coach. I don't want to say he's a great coach. I don't know that he's, he's obviously an improvement over Scott Frost. He's built Temple up in 4 years, had 2 10-win seasons and AAC championships there, built Baylor up at a hard time when they needed some positivity down there. But his overall CFB record's 57-52. He's, 5-8 in 2 seasons of Big Ten play, had a disastrous stint with Carolina Panthers in the NFL. Bucks are 9-1 this series. They've won 7 straight. Last meeting was 3 years ago. OSU won 25-17 in Lincoln. Lone loss in this series. Don't look it up. Don't Google it. Don't look at any YouTube videos of it. The Bowserman game. That's the game Ohio State led in 2011. There's a fickle game. 27-6 midway through the third quarter. Nebraska stormed back and won that game 34-27, scoring the final 28 points of the game. Joe Bowserman was 1 for 10 for 18 yards and an interception. And that's still, I'm trying to think of an all-time awful Ohio State quarterback line. That might be the worst of all time. I mean, that's hard to really beat 1 for 10 for 18 and a pick. And being real, I think, Chris, that's the first, that passing chart that someone put out and had all the balls all over Memorial Stadium. I think that's the first Ohio, like if you had a museum or an archive, that's like the first Ohio State football meme. I think it is. I want to say it is.
If it's not the first, I was thinking about this. When did
Kenny G the next year with the saxophone, but that was 12.
No, I was thinking the Jim Bowman Tecmo Bowl, like 4 plays and it's Dave. Like it's like
okay,
the Bowman play.
I take it back. The Bowman Dave predates.
That might have only been a year or two predating it. Maybe same season. I don't know. Awful team.
Dan, were you in school?
Yeah, I was a freshman at the time, and I was going to say I was a freshman at the time, and for like the next month after that game, somebody printed out the Bousman passing chart, and it was like on the elevator of our building.
That thing was everywhere, man. So maybe not the first meme, but maybe I don't want to say it was the first great meme because that Bowman Dave one is fantastic too. So it's up there in the OG category of memes. Cornhuskers started the season 3-0, had a good week 2 win over Colorado. Looks decent in retrospect. Rose to number 22, but lost in overtime game at home to Illinois. Illini held Nebraska to just 48 rushing yards on 33 carries, something to keep in mind for this weekend. Cornhuskers followed that with wins over Purdue and Rutgers, handing the Scarlet Knights their first loss of the season, kind of holding the 7 points, kind of surprised some people with that one. But then last week, Indiana dropped a 56-7 bomb on Nebraska and Bloomington. And you're like, I thought this team might be decent. Is this team good? What's going on with the team? A lot to unpack here. They put a lot, Chris, on Dylan Raiola.
Yeah, they asked him to do a lot, especially for a true freshman. And he's been playing pretty well, completing over 66% of his passes. But yeah, they're asking him to do an awful lot. I think he had 3 interceptions versus Indiana, but that's 3 of the 6 he's had all season. So I think he's, doing his part as a freshman, but they are having some, definitely having some pain on offense. But I'm also not sure that the field is littered with weapons for him. They're very deep. They got a whole bunch of guys catching passes. I think 5 players with at least 19 catches, but they don't really have like those game breakers, those go-to guys. And I think that's if you're going to start a true freshman, you got to put some stuff around him. And I think they just have a bunch of okay around him, not really much great around him, and that's creating some lumps.
Yeah, just 1 passing touchdown in his last 3 games. Dan, they've got size at receiver, but to Chris's point, like nobody's the dude over there. They got a couple guys who are 6'4", and like you give Ohio State some 6'4" receivers and watch what they can do with them. But like I feel like they're not getting it done to help them out.
Yeah, I mean, there's not anybody that scares you in this receiving core. I mean, I think that they're, this is a team. I think overall, this Nebraska team, it's a team that they're better than they've been, but I still don't know if they're good yet. And I think that, that's probably true, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And the defensive numbers are good, but the offensive side of the ball, I mean, I think you've seen it with Dylan, the flashes. I mean, I think in 2 years, when we're talking about Ohio State going on the road to play Nebraska that year, we'll probably be talking about Dylan Raiola being one of the best quarterbacks in the country. And we'll probably be talking about how his decommitment helped Ohio State get Julian Sayin, who will probably be its quarterback at the time. But I think, right now of what he's been this year, I think he's had his moments, but he's also looked like a freshman at times. I think probably the guy in terms of their weapons that I probably will have my eye on in this game is Thomas Fedone, but their tight end, particularly because of the fact that Lathan Ransom is out. That's a guy who's typically going to be, one of the main guys covering that tight end. He is one of their top targets. And so I'll be interested to see how does Ohio State handle him, because you think ahead to next week when they have to play maybe the best tight end in the country and Tyler Warren. That's going to be a big question mark for Ohio State is how well do they cover the tight end? So how well they can take Fedone out of a game is something I'm going to be watching for this week.
Yeah, Fedone's 6'6", massive size, 0 touchdowns for the season. But if you're going to go to him, this might be the week to try it for Matt Rule. The focus, Chris, on Raiola kind of neglects the running game a bit. They're kind of bad nationally, 95th with 3.71 yards a carry. They've 200 rushing yards just once this season. They're under 100 yards in each of their last 2 games. What do they got there, and what's the concern for Ohio State?
Yeah, I don't know that there's much concern for Ohio State when you think about trying to stop the run game. They got 3 guys with near 40 carries, but sophomore Dante Dowdell is the lead dog, at least so far this season, although I think only had 7 carries versus Indiana, but he's got 350 yards on the season, but only on 4.3 a pop. So that's obviously nothing that, imagine that it's somebody at Ohio State averaging 4.3 and being your leading rusher. That'd be tough to swallow. Matt Rule also announced yesterday that Ramir Johnson, who's a backup running back, is in that in that 3-man rotation. He's third in rushing yards. He's sixth in receiving yards for Nebraska. He's not going to play, so they'll be a little thinner there too. And then Raiola also is not really as much as they put the ball in his hands. He's not really a threat to run the ball either. So I would imagine Ohio State's going to not be fearing Nebraska's rushing attack too much tomorrow.
Defensively, they trot out a 3-3-5, something unique that you've got to prepare for. You're not going to see all the time. They've got decent numbers. Dan, you alluded to that earlier. 18th overall in total defense, 16th in rush defense, 19th in scoring defense. They've got some good metrics, but is it kind of the same thing that Ohio State had, where they put up some really good defensive numbers against UTEP, Northern Iowa? Be blessing to play Purdue this year. Anyone's going to put up some decent defensive numbers, except for Illinois. Caught Rutgers at a decent time. I say all this, I'm kind of dumping on them, but they also have 2 defensive linemen with more sacks than JTT and Jack Sawyer. So it's like, oh, why can they do that? I think a real critical spot will be watching how Zen performs and what Ohio State does, maybe to help with pass pro. Does it pull someone off another end to help, another guy? Are you pulling away from that? What are your thoughts on how Ohio State will deal with that?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because, I said it earlier this week on Real Pod Wednesdays. The thing about that is, this injury doesn't just affect the left tackle spot, because if you have to give Zen more help, well, now Josh Fryer is going to have more one-on-ones. And we've seen Josh Fryer have trouble at times when he's been put into those one-on-one spots, particularly against speed rushers. And so that's the challenge. Is I think you do, especially in this game, of being his first start, you do have to move more help to his side. But then, the right side was the weaker side of the line before this injury. So now if you take more help away from that side, are those guys going to be able to elevate their game? So it's not just Zen who has to elevate his game here. It's really the entire offensive line. And, this is not as big of a test as he will face next week with Abdul Carter and Penn State, but this is still a team that can test the offensive line, because as you said, they're top 20 in sacks. They do have a couple guys. I think James Williams, their leading sack guy, his nickname is Sack Man. So we'll see if, he lives up to that name on Saturday. But yeah, I mean, this is, I think Nebraska's good enough for this game to be telling of whether Zen Mahalski is up to the task, if he's ready to be the guy for the rest of the year, or if that's a big problem they're going to have to address going into next week's trip to Penn State.
Man, you better deliver if your nickname is Sackman. That's all I'm going to say. You can't you couldn't think of something else. Just did Grandma give him that nickname? Sackman? We're going to call you Sackman, big boy. You got to deliver, James. We're all eyes are on Sackman this weekend. Judkins coming back, Chris, after the hand procedure. Day said he seemed to be better than prior to the procedure, which you love to hear. Opportunity for him and Travion to eat, because Indiana carved Nebraska to 6.5 a carry last week.
Yeah, I think it's the chance. Like Dan said, you got to see this offensive line come together. I would imagine. I don't know. I mean, I know that Will Howard has struggled with the deep ball this year. It's not a huge part of Ohio State's attack. I don't know that I see that being that this week either. I think with you're going to run the ball for sure, but I think the stuff Ohio State's been successful with is Chip kind of hiding maybe where they have some opportunity. So some misdirection, those kinds of things will be part of the offense. But I wonder how much we're going to see Quinshon and Travion maybe catching the ball out of the backfield, more of these bubbles and different things like that to receivers. I don't know, especially early. You want Zen to get some roots down and not be having to block 3 times in a row on 5-step drops or something like that when he's trying to get his his feet underneath him. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see a lot of quick stuff, a lot of misdirection, things like that at first, just to try to ease this offensive line into the game, and then we'll see what happens from there. But you hit it, Dan. I mean, coming into the season, the offensive line, even the starters, was the right side, at least, was the biggest concern I had about the whole team. The second part was offensive line depth, and now you're seeing that be taxed or challenged, and we'll see how they respond. So, out of all the things Saturday, I know it's not sexy, but I will be looking at, hey, how does this offensive line do? Because you're right, Dan. I think that Nebraska is extremely beatable, but I do think they got some guys up front that can provide a little bit of a test where we can at least start to evaluate how Ohio State's revamped offensive line may look, or if, oh gosh, they need to decide, are they going to kick a Donovan Jackson out the tackle? And what are they going to do, right, if Zen doesn't work?
Yeah, Dan, Chris touched on the downfield passing game briefly. That was sorely missing against Oregon, downfield shots. As good as Will's been in the month of October, he's 80% or better in both games completion, which is phenomenal. he struggled this season with underthrows. Some JT Barrett jokes popping up every now and then when he goes deep. They've made that a focus this week of getting a lot of long throws out. Do you expect improvement there?
We'll see. I mean, I think Will, to some degree, is who he is, and the deep ball is not the strength of his game. And I think, we talked earlier about defensive schematic adjustments. I think that's something Ryan Day and Chip Kelly deserve credit on. I think they've done a good job of scheming up this passing attack around Will Howard's strengths, playing to his, strengths. Because I think short intermediate game, he's been fantastic. I think he's done a great job of, making great decisions, showing great command of the offense, getting that running threat in there from a quarterback position that had been sorely missed the last few years. I think Ohio State's done a really good job of playing to the quarterback's strength, which is something Ryan Day's always talked about, whether it was Dwayne Haskins or Justin Fields or CJ Stroud or Kyle McCord or now Will Howard. You have to tailor your offense around the quarterback's strengths. And I think realistically, the deep ball just isn't Will Howard's strength. Now, is it something they need to continue to work on to make defenses take that seriously? Yes. But I think we're going to suddenly get to a point where he's throwing the ball as deep as often as CJ Stroud was. I don't, just because I don't think that's the strength of his game.
Yeah, for sure. And you already got me kind of dreaming a little bit about the future Julian Sayin throwing bombs to Jeremiah Smith, because Sayin is a guy that will be able to deliver on those. And
it is sexy, but I wonder how much it's really needed. Like, you need to be able to do it in certain points if the defense is just cheating up so bad on you that, you can throw it over the top. But for it to just be something as part of their, arsenal that they do 4 or 5 times a game, I don't know that they have to do that to win, particularly if it's not his strength. Because I tell you, his accuracy has been a lot better than I expected it to be. His decision making has been really good, which I did think it would be because he's made a million starts. But I don't know. I don't think you're right. He's never going to be great at the deep ball, but I also don't know that that's they have bigger problems, I guess, than whether or not they can complete 3 deep shots a game, in my opinion.
I like him. I think you got to diversify your offense and keep, there's the obvious thing you mentioned, but you just throwing them in there, man. There's shots when they think they may be coming. Just the fact that, this might be coming, maybe if they're not even cheating, just have it in the back of their mind. Quick special teams note, Nebraska starting kicker Tristan Albano hasn't played since September 14th. Backup kicker John Hull, I think I'm pronouncing that right. Hope so, buddy. 1 for 5, 0 for 2 from 30 to 39, 0 for 2 from 40 to 49. So Matt Rule desperately hopes this game doesn't come down to a kick because he's in deep trouble.
They should have open tryouts and slam his current kicker. Like what's his name? I like the young guy out at Arizona State, but
Kenny Dillingham.
Yeah. He gave Parker Lewis a hard way to go.
I love it. So hey guys, is this going to be an angry Ohio State team? Do you expect that?
I mean, you'd hope so. I mean, I think that's maybe something that gets like a little bit like overblown, but I think certainly you talk about motivation. I mean, this is a team, they've had 2 weeks to stew on that Oregon loss. They should be ready to come out and make a statement. And I think too, I don't think it's front of mind this week because of the Oregon loss, but I don't know, like, at least for me, like, if I'm a player on that Ohio State defense and I see Dylan Raiola across the line, like, I kind of want to show him what he missed out on. Like, I want to have a big game and kind of show like, hey, you were supposed to come here. You decided to go there. Let's remind you who the big dog is. So, I think there's certainly going to be a lot of motivation to go out and make a statement. I think, the important thing though this week though is, you just want to take care of business. Like, I don't think you want to get so caught up in that because, I think back to 3 years ago when Ohio State plays Michigan State the week before Michigan and they go and it's 56-7, they blow them out, they make the statement, and then they lay an egg the next week. You got a really big game next week against Penn State. So you can't worry about that right now. You got to go take care of business. But I also don't think you need to be so high on we have to make a statement this week that, you throw everything you have into this game when the intensity is going to really ratchet back up again next week.
Alumni of note from Nebraska, Warren Buffett, CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. Rich dude, cool dude. I don't know if you guys have ever seen any documentaries on the guy. Like, he's got a small office with a Coke soda fountain installed in it because he owns Coke stock and he drinks like 1,000 Cokes and eats ice cream for breakfast. And he's like 90 years old. John Blackjack Pershing, Army legend. Probably make an argument he's the grandfather of the Army. Well, maybe that's George Washington, but Pershing's up there too. Commanded U.S. forces in World War I. He's a mentor to Marshall, Eisenhower, Bradley, Patton, MacArthur, and a whole slew of other generals that became famous in World War II. Johnny Carson, host of The Tonight Show. Dan, you may not know who that man is, but Chris and I remember him from our childhood for sure.
I'm not that young. I mean, I know who he is.
Okay.
Just never saw him on TV.
Yeah, you just never saw him live, right?
Yeah.
Tyrone Lue, LA Clippers head coach, brought glory to Cleveland in 2016. They'll always remember him fondly for that series.
Yeah, he was responsible for that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. It was him. Nothing at all LeBron did. Isa Kalantari, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Former vice president of Iran. Nice look there, Nebraska. Nice look. So some good ones in there. Hey, it's time for Rapid Five. 5 quick questions, 5 quick answers. Emphasis on quick. Sometimes we get people on, they want to have like a 2-minute session on their answers. Well, let's make it a little quick. We can do this. I'm gonna get a buzzer for this too for later shows. First one. You guys ready?
Yep.
Do it.
How many sacks does Ohio State record against Nebraska?
4.
3.
All right. Will Dylan Raiola make a trip to New York City for the Heisman ceremony at least once in his college career?
No, I don't think Nebraska is going to be good enough for him to get there.
Ditto. No way.
What round will Denzel Burke hear his name called at the 2025 NFL Draft?
Pains me to say it, but I got to go 3rd round right now.
Man, I feel like, I was going to say 3rd. We need to have some differing opinions here. But I'm thinking 3rd.
I'm going to go 2nd just because I think he's going to show well in Indy. And cornerbacks, you need them.
Yeah.
Next question. Should Pete Rose be in the Baseball Hall of Fame?
Yes. Can't leave the hit king out.
Absolutely.
My heart says yes. My brain says no. It's a terrible precedent to put a guy in the gambled in on sports, but I would love to see him in there. So I'm going to
put him in as a player.
Last one, real toughest one of the day. Who has the best fast food fries?
Those Arby's curly fries are pretty good. Everything else there sucks, but the fries are good.
Wow. Off the top rope at Arby's, huh?
Rally.
Well, I know we've used to have, a big Arby's stand on this staff. So gotta bring some balance to it.
There we go. Chris, what'd you say?
Stuff is bad. Rallies for me without
Rallies.
a doubt. Yeah.
All right.
Easy call.
Do you have rallies out in your like bougie neighborhood? They probably can't get a permit.
I'll tell you what I get though. You ever get at Kroger, they have rallies like frozen.
No way.
Really? Put those in the air fryer put those on 400 for 13 minutes. And I'm
going to go with Chick-fil-A. I love those waffle fries, man. It's probably the sauce.
Sure.
Honestly, it's probably the sauce, but gosh, those fries are good. It's time to laugh at Michigan for a little bit. And we're going to do that because they're 4-3 now. Lost 2 straight games, fresh off that 21-7 loss to Burt Bielema. Illinois' uniforms were amazing, by the way. Helmets were sick. Losing 21-7 to Burt, they couldn't seem to do anything well in that game, whether it was turnovers, throwing the ball. Look at these 2 sets of stats from our dude Zach Shaw right here. And can you imagine what life would be like in Columbus right now if, they were 119th in yards per game or 112th in points per game or 130th in passes of 20 plus yards or 132nd in yards per pass attempt? That's fun to look at. And it's one of those things, you see the tweet and you're like, I'm just going to smile for 5 minutes because this is so good to enjoy.
Yeah, I think I was talking to Garrick Hodge earlier this week, and he made the point that Navy has more passing yards than Michigan.
Is that real?
It was something along those lines. I'm pretty sure it is real, and that's insane.
Wow. Yeah, I'm in shock a little bit from that. Got to go back. This team's wobbling, man. You got to go back to 1967. This is a Dan Hope stat when Sparty went 3-7 after winning the Natty for a bigger national champion fall off than we're witnessing right now. This is a team, they're 4-3, could very, very easily be 2-5 right now. They won the USC game on a run on a 4th down, which they got to their credit. And then they ripped Minnesota off on an onside kick. And Minnesota was scoring there. There's no doubt in my mind. They had 14 or 17 points in the 4th quarter already. This is just so fun to watch right now. I wonder, Chris, what is the difference besides Harbaugh? But what's the difference between last year's team and this year's team?
That's the world's greatest mystery. I don't know. It's not cheating. Maybe it is cheating. Maybe it's 30-year-old linemen. Maybe it's all the good coaches left. But it's probably mostly not cheating. But I just looked it up. Navy has more passing yards than Michigan. They have 966. Michigan has 898. Navy actually has 51 less completions than Michigan and still has more passing yards.
That's amazing. You know, we should do
Michigan's averaging 5.4 per attempt.
Dan, every Monday we should put out a tweet or a graphic on Instagram. It just says, does Navy still have more passing yards than Michigan? And just have like the running total, kind of like the Ferentz tracker they had last year when he had to get to 25. Brian Ferentz is the OC in Iowa. Man, that's fun. I had no idea Navy had more passing yards than Michigan, but that's probably the coolest thing I've learned this week.
And fun fact, Navy's quarterback is from Hilliard, Ohio. So right down the road.
Yeah, that is a fun fact. Something's changed. I mean, Mark Helfrich, when he took over for Chip, was all right for a couple of years at Oregon. Larry Coker was all right for a couple of years after, Miami changed hands. Some of these guys, the poster childs for like kind of inheriting things and screwing them up. They do like well for 1 to 2 or maybe even 3 years. But then you start to see like the rot from how they coach and run the program seep in. For this to happen right away, it's either Sharon Moore's really the worst coach possible they could have hired, or it's because the guy that's stealing signs can't tell them what play is coming and what play they should run. And I'm having a really hard time. I know Sharon's probably a mediocre coach, but for this kind of drop off, and I know they lost players, I know their coaches in the NFL, I know they lost some staff members, but this is kind of unprecedented. Is this?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is the fact that you went from having a first round quarterback to having, we're not just talking like the worst quarterback room in the Big Ten. We're talking about one of the worst quarterback rooms in the FBS, period. I mean, it's bad. And it starts there. I mean, you go from having, I think, was it back-to-back Joe Moore Award wins on the offensive line to having a mediocre at best offensive line. I mean, it all starts there, but then, certainly, you take away, you don't have, this defensive coordinator who was doing a great job for the past few years. I mean, you don't have, Jim Harbaugh anymore, and you don't have the guy who was, your sign stealing mastermind. So I think you put all of that together, and it leads to this, massive drop off from where they were to where they are now.
Chris, in my tiny fan brain, I'm allocating like 98% of it to Connor Stallions and like 2% of it, 1% to Harbaugh, 1% to losing a quarterback. So, and you'll never be able to talk me off that stance.
Yeah, I mean, it's a high percentage. I don't know if it's 98. Just because, they had a lot of talent last year. Absolutely, they had a very veteran team. They had a very moxified quarterback. They had a good defense. I mean, they did, right. Like, it may suck to admit, but they did. There were definitely some games where they weren't stealing signs and they were still winning some games. So I begrudgingly will say that. But over the duration of those years, yeah, cheating is it matters.
Yep,
knowing what the other team's going to do miraculously, it helps you.
Right, and they lost talent, but they have talent back, man. They have Edwards. They have they have the best cornerback, supposedly the best cornerback.
They have no wide receivers. That corner's been hurt. Like they have two really good defensive tackles for sure, but my God, their skill positions are struggling, man. I think one running back's good, one's not. They have no good receivers. They have a really good tight end. They have 4 quarterbacks, and none of them are good. And that offensive line's a hot mess. So.
Love it. More of it, please. Michigan fans are in their feelings quite a bit. This first one from, we've got some screenshots here we want to share. Moore was born on third base, but got caught trying to steal second. This is the worst OL and quarterback room in the Big Ten, maybe all of FBS. This is, again, this comment was probably made shortly after or during, maybe the second half of the Illinois loss. Next one, I was encouraged that we were able to put up 7 points on a defense that held Purdue to 49, which is a really, really fun way to kind of frame that. I honestly can't believe what I saw on offense came after a bye week. Yeah, they went into that Illinois game on a bye week and kind of crapped the bed. The follow-up comment, I can't believe that performance was done by scholarship athletes. And lastly, this was last weekend when they're seeing, Michigan State beating Iowa. And the realization is starting to dawn on them, Chris. We've talked about this for a while, looking ahead of their schedule. Like, there's not many wins left, and it's starting to dawn on them. This guy's like, we may only win one more game this season, or maybe none. No bowl and no bowl practices would be absolutely devastating. Let's look at that schedule, the rest of their schedule. Saturday, 7:30 on BTN, Michigan State. They get them at home. Sparty's fresh off that clubbing of Iowa, but man, the line was Michigan -5 early. Now it's Michigan -3.5. I have a feeling, Chris, you and I will be cheering for the green and white in that one. Do you think they'll get it done?
You know what? I think they've got a really good chance. I mean, if that quarterback for Michigan State, if Childs doesn't make a bunch of mistakes, I mean, he's an electric guy. So, yeah, I think Michigan State's got better than a puncher's chance in that game.
New coach for Sparty, trying to get that W, his first meeting in the series. Next week, Dan, they've got number 1 Oregon. They get them in the big house. And, it may help Ohio State to have Michigan actually win that game. But, I think most Ohio State fans will still cheer for Oregon, maybe for Oregon to put up 60 or 50, points on the Wolverines.
Yeah, I don't think that, many Ohio State fans, I think when it comes to Michigan, playoff implications are great. But I think, especially after what happened the last 3 years, it's, you just want to see Michigan burn. I mean, we worry about the Big Ten championship and playoff implications in all the other games.
Then you got Wolverines go to number 13, Indiana, and presumably Indiana will probably be a top 10 team by then for the November 9th game. Michigan's off. Then they've got Northwestern on the 23rd of November, and they finally end it all at Ohio State on the 30th. How many wins do you guys see in there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 remaining games. How many wins?
I'm giving them 2, but that's this week and Northwestern. But my confidence level in that for this week is not particularly high. I mean, to me, I think this week's a must-win game for Michigan in terms of bowl eligibility, because unless they find something in that passing game that they have not come close to yet this year, it's really hard to see them beating Oregon, Indiana, or Ohio State. I mean, I'll continue to say, you can't overlook Michigan if you're Ohio State because of what's happened the last 3 years. But man, I mean, just on paper, how those are 3 teams that all have very dynamic offenses. How is Michigan possibly going to score enough to keep up with them with how bad its quarterback play has been?
How about you, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, same thing, right? This game this weekend, I feel like it's a toss-up. Other than that, Northwestern's the only one you probably feel really good about if you're a Michigan fan. So, yeah, the over-under is 1.5.
I love it, man. And that, to me, that Indiana game too is when the lights really come on for even the glass half full people in the Michigan fandom, because the Hoosiers are going to boat race. It's at home. They're welcoming Michigan. They'll be a top 10 team. They're going to annihilate the Wolverines, and that's going to be fun to watch. Fun games elsewhere this weekend in the Big Ten. One I'm looking for, Illinois, man, going out to Oregon. Will be the most, physical team probably Oregon's played in the Big Ten since they've been in there. How does Oregon handle being number 1? They are favored by 3 touchdowns. I'm not expecting an Illinois win, but these are the games where you're like, man, that was brutal. That was a really hard fought game. We pulled away late, but maybe a guy's got dinged up, and that affects you later as November starts to wear on. What about you guys? Any games you see out there on the schedule?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, certainly, for me, for Big Ten this week, certainly that, Michigan State game is very intriguing to me just because of, what I think it means for Michigan in terms of its bowl eligibility. I think that Washington Indiana game will be interesting too because of the fact that Indiana does not have Curtis Rourke this week. Taven Jackson looked really good last week, but he came into a game that was already well in hand. That's different than being the starter and having to be the guy that gets you out of the gate, maybe has to fight you through some adversity in that game. So I think it'll be interesting. I think Indiana will win that game, but I think maybe Washington makes it tight, gives them a bit of a scare because of the fact that they don't have Rourke.
Yeah, Chris, number 3 Penn State's got to go to Wisconsin. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, obviously Fickles, his alumni, his former football, the former football players were turning on him a little while ago, and now they've won 3 straight and just annihilated Rutgers. I can't remember what the spread for that game was, but it certainly wasn't 35. They won 42-7. So that one's tough though, because I want to watch that game from a scouting purposes, but I don't feel like anything really Wisconsin does is what Ohio State does, particularly offensively. But I am interested to see. I hope it's a physical affair. I hope Wisconsin can kind of tenderize them a little bit, just thinking of looking ahead to next week. But I do think Penn State's a better team and at this point, I kind of want them to win to just set up next week being even that much bigger.
Yep, the Lions favored by 6.5. Big Ten doing everyone a favor. UCLA and Purdue are off this weekend, so you're basically getting the 16 most interesting Big Ten teams playing, which thank you. I'm not sure how that worked out. Story we've talked about a lot in this show through the weeks this season is just how fun this season is going to be. Expanded playoff, NIL creating parity, fewer possessions creating parity, fewer snaps creating parity. guys moving across the country to fill in with new impact roles on new teams. We knew it was going to be fun, but it's shaping up to be like maybe a little bit more fun than I even anticipated. Just this week, we saw Kennesaw State beat Liberty 27-24. Liberty was unbeaten, led the nation with a 17-game regular season win streak. KSU was 0-6 coming in, 207th in the nation in SP+. It's their first year in FBS. Liberty, a 27-point favorite. KSU gets it done, though. First win ever against an FBS team for them. And it's the first win since 2001 that a team 0-5 or worse beat a team 5-0 or better. Got to see 2 field rushes. How fun was that night?
That was so much fun. It's funny because I was talking to some guys before interviews on Wednesday night, and I'm like, I just can't get into a Wednesday night college football. Like, do we really need like this Tuesday and Wednesday college football? Like, it's almost like a little too much. And then, like, lo and behold, I get home, I see Kennesaw State is tied with Liberty, and I'm watching Wednesday night college football. And you talk about big upsets this year. I mean, maybe it won't get as much attention as like a Vanderbilt over Bama just because it's not that name brand. But I mean, this really might be the biggest upset in college football this year. I mean, this is a team that had never won an FBS game, and it goes and takes out a team that had legitimate college football playoff aspirations. If you look at the ESPN SP Plus rankings, this is a team that was ranked worse than like 70 FCS teams and 7 Division II teams, and they beat Liberty, a team that had a chance to go to the college football playoff. So, I mean, I love it because, I think, for people who had watched Liberty and really looked at that schedule, like, they did not belong in the college football playoff race. Like, I don't think they were going to get the bid anyway, but like, when you got a chance at like Ashton Jeanty in the college football playoff or Army or Navy in the college football playoff, like, I'm just glad we've eliminated the possibility of Liberty stealing that bid.
That's a good way to look at it. Chris, it's not even November. Look at all these traditional powers with 1 or more losses. Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, Tennessee, LSU, Clemson, Notre Dame, Bama with 2 losses, Michigan with 3, Oklahoma with 3, USC with 4, Florida State with 6. Like, 4 teams have been ranked number 1 in the AP poll. SP Plus has had a new number 1 team in 5 of the last 6 weeks. This, I don't know. I think for me, it's funny, Chris, that at least one weekend this year, you have all these fan bases of traditional powers, blue bloods in some cases. They've just been completely pissed off, because their mind's still not adapting to the new reality of like, hey, you still got a chance. And they're probably thinking that in a small part, but there's still that instinctual college football. We lost, we suck, the season's over kind of creeps in. I just love it, man. Yeah, well, it's great for the sport. I mean, you love to see the outrage for sure. The the shit talking on Twitter and everywhere else it's a fantastic thing. So yeah, I'm not sure if it's parody yet or not. I don't know, but yeah, it's been an awesome season. I definitely find myself watching more of these random night games, to your point, Dan, because it's like, man, what might happen? Like, you talked about Wednesday, and I'm with you. I didn't see any of the game Wednesday night, but like tonight, I haven't even looked at what it is yet, but I'm throwing some money on the games tonight because the Friday
Boise State UNLV,
so awesome. Yeah, it's a CFP playing game. Yeah, the games have been fantastic. But even when they're not that, right? I mean, I've watched Kyle McCord play some games, and it's like they're just been fantastic games on Fridays. So yeah, just the college football season has been so nutty that these Fridays have been awesome little appetizers to go into the main course on Saturdays. Yeah, another theme, Dan, is that like November is going to be crazy, because the SEC and the Big Ten are so massive now, and then all leagues have eliminated divisions basically. So you're going to have a mad scramble. Someone showed yesterday in our Slack that brought some facts in that there's a potential scenario in the SEC in which 9 teams finish 6-2 atop the SEC. So that's A, crazy. And then B, I would advise all leagues to keep their tiebreaker rules written in pencil, because there's going to be some outrage about those really soon, if not this year, maybe next year. Dan, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, we saw it during the COVID year of it. Tiebreakers can change very quickly, so I'm sure you're right that there will be changes to the tiebreakers based on certain outcomes over the next couple of years. But I mean, you and I have been talking about it all offseason, man. Like, we always said, like, this is going to be awesome. Like, the people that are like, oh, the games aren't going to matter anymore. Like, if you ever felt that at any point in this year, like, oh, the games don't matter anymore because 12 teams get in. No, it's the total opposite. That there's so many more games that matter now, because there's, we'd be talking about in Indiana, and we'd be talking about, well, it's a nice story, but they're probably not going to beat Ohio State, and they probably won't make the Big Ten championship, which means they won't make the playoff. Now it's like, hey, the Hoosiers don't even need to beat Ohio State, and they can be in the college football playoff. Like, that's fun. So, like, I mean, I've always been all for playoff expansion, and so far it's been everything I hoped it would be.
Sure has. Speaking of the playoff, look at this projected field from The Athletic, and we're going to show it on the screen here. A lot can change. Still have Ohio State as a 5, and most Ohio State fans would probably be telling you they're a 1 or a 2 seed when the dust settles. But first round games, man, higher seed hosts. They've got Notre Dame hosting Clemson in December. Wonder if Dabo will like that. Wonder if his players will like playing, because Notre Dame gets cold, man. That's no joke. They're like 10 miles from the Michigan border. Buckeyes hosting Boise State. Mixed feelings here. Don't really want to host a playoff game because you want your team to have a higher seed, but at the same time, that would be insanely fun, and the whole town would be the event of the month. Like, everyone, are you going to the playoff game? You going to the playoff game? This town would be electric. Texas hosting Indiana. Get to head south, the Hoosiers for that one. Penn State hosting Tennessee. Gets cold in Happy Valley in December. Oregon, Iowa State, Miami, and Georgia with the byes right now in the quarterfinals. But man, I cannot wait. I've always loved March Madness. I've always thought, football is way more physical. You can't have 64 teams, too many games. But if you can just have a little bit more, whether that's 8, 12, 16, whatever it is, we're on 12. I can't wait. December is going to be off the charts. Like, I'm worried that I'll forget to get presents for my family. Like, I'm going to be like, so, Chris, I mean, right? Like, what are we going to do? That's going to be a nutty month.
Yeah, it's going to be wild. Yeah, I was already asked certain things like, hey, we're going to go out of town. I'm like, just know that Ohio State may play that Saturday. So, yeah, we can go somewhere else. Just know that if they do, that at 8 o'clock or 4 o'clock or whatever it's going to be.
No fall weddings and nothing in December.
With any of those people, wherever it is we're going. So, just be mindful. But, yeah, that's pretty interesting. I do have a question for you guys. So, the quarterfinals, like, obviously the top 4 conference champs are in the first round bye, as you think right now. Oregon, Miami, Georgia, Iowa State. How do you reconcile that? Yeah, you need to win your conference. That's important. Versus then you see some of these teams and you're like, they're not even among the 4 best. Yeah. Do you think a conference championship should guarantee you a bye, or at some point do they need to say, no, we need the 4 best teams in here?
Yeah, I have a feeling, like kind of like Jason was saying, of tiebreakers, that that's something that could get reconsidered in a couple years when the contract gets renewed for 2 reasons. Because one, who holds all the power in college football going forward? The SEC and the Big Ten. And so, I don't think those 2 love the fact that 2 of their teams that are probably better than the ACC and the Big 12 champs are not getting those first round buys. And then secondly, to your point, you have this argument that started now of, it's better to get the 5 seed than it is to get the 1 because you get an easier quarterfinal game. With that being said, I don't want to be the team that's hosting Boise State in the first round because Ashton Jeanty is really good. And I've talked about this with some of our guys. Just imagine what the narrative is going to be like in Columbus if Ohio State's a 5 seed and it loses to Boise State in the first round. And that's true for any big program.
Why are you trying to get the town burned down, man? Like Columbus.
Day's house will burn down.
Yeah. Go get a buy. I mean, it doesn't matter. But, that's my point is it's like, especially in year 1, I don't want to be the team that's playing the group of 5 team because that's like the worst case scenario for you narrative wise if you lose that game.
Yeah. Chris, to your question, I think that we will see some tweaks, like Dan said, because of the money. But at the same time, I love that wrinkle in the NFL. Like Cleveland had a much better record when they went to Houston to play in the playoffs because Houston won their division. Mm-hmm. And that's similar to how this is structured. So we'll see what prevails. But to Dan's point, like the money talks and the Big Ten, the SEC are going to absolutely throw their weight around. We may not see this for too long, but I'm okay with it. Big fun slate of games this weekend. Looking at this list, what's a game you guys have your eye on?
I got to go Notre Dame Navy. I mean, Navy's got a chance at this thing to make a run at the college football playoff. If they can pull off the upset in this game, like you got to really start taking Navy seriously because this is the toughest test on their schedule. And it's the kind of win that would give them legitimacy in the eyes of the college football playoff committee. So I'm kind of disappointed that game's at the same time as Ohio State and Nebraska because I'd like to be able to watch that one.
Yeah, that's at noon on ABC. Notre Dame favored by nearly 2 touchdowns, but just a normal Saturday, the entire nation rooting against Notre Dame. That'll be fun. Chris, what about you?
Yeah, no, Notre Dame and Navy is definitely the one that sticks out for me. But I guess I'll say Texas at Vandy will be an interesting one to keep an eye on. I know Texas is a pretty heavy favorite, but Vandy's obviously pulled off some magic already once this year. Texas got humbled a little bit. So that's one I'll definitely be watching. I'm not sure that I think Texas is necessarily on upset alert, but I'll definitely be tuning in to see if Vandy can get a little magic going early and maybe get Texas play a little tight.
Yeah, that's it. 4:15 on the SEC network. Longhorns favored by 18.5. I don't know that Florida State's going to get it done. They probably won't get it done, but it's a rivalry game. ESPN Saturday night. It's at Miami. That may make it a little tougher, but they have the chance at 1-6 playing a 7-0 team to do the funniest thing in the world for the sport. And of all seasons to witness something like that, why not, right? Canes are 21-point favorites. Does not take a lot for me to cheer up against the Canes, even though I'm, who's a big FSU fan anyway. But between the two, I'd probably go with the lesser of two evils there. So we'll be checking that one out. All right, folks, it's time for our favorite part of the show. What's your price? We dive into the things in life we could do for the right price. We're talking about the fun, harmless stuff that doesn't hurt anyone or break the law, like driving 10 miles an hour under the speed limit for an entire year or entering a professional slap contest. What's your price? Here it is, gentlemen. How much are you charging to serve an entire home game as a Franklin County sheriff atop the towers at the north end of the shoe in the worst possible weather imaginable? Think about Michigan State 2015, just like sideways raining ice, basically. Is this
1950 Snow Bowl? I mean, that's
something like
that's like the worst weather.
Yeah. I mean, they're both bad. They're for different reasons. Snow can kind of be warm sometimes if it does the right thing. But that MSU game I was at, and it's the worst experience I've ever had in any football game. So think about the worst weather possible. You got to stand up there. You can hardly move. You got to salute the flag or whatever when that goes up for the national anthem. But you're not moving. You got to have your phone out. You're not playing games. You're not reading text. You're not talking to your friends. I don't know what their bathroom rules are, but assume you can't use the bathroom because I don't know if I've ever seen one go. Maybe halftime. What's your price, guys? It's, 3 hours, 3.5, 4 hours tops.
Probably longer than that, right? I mean, if you got to be there, those guys are probably there pretty early.
Didn't think of that.
Stay until they leave, at least till a chunk of the crowd is filing out, I would imagine.
So call it a 5-hour run. And let's assume you can use the bathroom, but it's like we can only go once. And you're not eating, you're not cheering. It's just the weather's awful. How much are you charging for 5 hours out in the worst weather possible? And bonus, I guess, if you're scared of heights, because that could impact your price too.
Yeah.
Oh, man, that's a tough one because everybody knows I'm not a cold weather guy. I don't like cold. So it sounds,
New Englander, man. You're a New Englander.
It sounds absolutely, I got Southern blood despite growing up in Massachusetts. But it sounds absolutely horrible. But you also got to look at it and go, okay, 5 hours. Like it's 5 hours. Like when you're done, like, if I had, $20,000 in my bank account, like, would that be worth it? I'd say yeah. So I'll say 20,000.
20,000.
Are you rich, man?
He did just buy a car, though. He did just buy a car. Yeah. So
sure.
I'm thinking like 1,000, honestly, 2,000.
Yeah, I was too. I'm like, man, 5 hours, $200 an hour, free and clear.
200, $400 an hour. Dan, you wouldn't do it for 20,000? Oh, wow.
No, I said I would do it for 20,000.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You wouldn't do it for anything less than my.
Well, you got to start the negotiation high, right? So
okay, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, I mean, could you convince me to do it for 10? I mean, possibly. I mean, probably, but you gotta.
If $5,000 was sitting on the table in front of you right now, you're telling me you wouldn't stand up there for 5 hours in that weather?
It's tough. I mean, it is $1,000 an hour. That is a lot of money. So
there's not many things I wouldn't do for $1,000 an hour.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of money, man. That's a lot of money.
I'm trying to think of like the game to me right now, Chris, is how low will I go? Like, what's the lowest?
I know that's kind of where I was at. Yeah,
because I don't think I would do it for 500. I don't. I mean, the weather, you're going to be frozen. It's going to suck. You're going to be cussing. You're going to hate it.
Well, it's just what am I going to do with that money? If it's just another $500, like, not to say that's not money, that's money, but like
flex time.
What am I turning that into? No, just what's that really going to be? If I'm going to stand up there and freeze my ass off, it's got to be a little more than $500, I think. But I do think I would do it for $200 an hour.
200 an hour. So you're at 1,000.
Yeah, I couldn't go that
750.
low.
I might do 750. No, I can't. I think I'm at probably 1,000 as low as I can go. Dan, you can't get to 1,000.
No, I couldn't go. I couldn't go that low.
Man, these days, I saw these things like little hand warmers or like USB. You charge them up. They're like just these little things. Like I've seen stuff where you got to shake it and break it and whatever. These things just plug in and they're hot as hell. You can hold those in your hands.
You got
like
these
electric
vests now?
or like battery socks.
The rechargeable.
I'd certainly be
Yeah.
there. I'd be very bundled up there. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I look like
You can make it
Christmas story kid, all bundled up.
Chris, you got me thinking lower now than I'm thinking some of these technological advances we have with get some Gore-Tex to keep you dry. And, a lot of the hockey parents have. You guys seen those vests or jackets that have like batteries in them, the lithium batteries?
Yeah,
You charge basically charge the jacket and it keeps the whole coat up.
Key to me is your feet, man. You got to keep your toes and your feet warm in those situations.
That's tough. That is tough. I was in Buffalo once for outdoor hockey for my kid. And it was like, we're in Buffalo in January, February. And they literally canceled school because it was so cold. It wasn't snowy. It was just super cold. And my feet, I want to say, and I thought I prepared, man, but I feel like my feet were as cold as they've ever been in my life. And that was only like an hour. So 5 hours. Oh, man. All right. Now I'm back up around 15, 2,000. I'm going to say 2K.
2K?
2K. I thought of the feet thing, man. 5 hours is a long time. That's awful weather.
Yeah, I don't think 1,000's not like, because I would assume I don't know, but I would assume a person who get what they actually get paid to do that. Like it's got to be at least 1,000, right? It's a big job.
At least, I'm sure it's at least
Probably
$100
making
an hour.
125, 150 special duty.
Yeah.
I'm guessing.
Yeah.
I bet it's almost 1,000, but not quite.
Fair.
So I feel comfortable saying I need more than what they get.
Same.
So,
Man, I'm soft. I can't believe I would be winning because I still feel like I'm where I'm comfortable with saying 200 an hour. Remember, it's tax free, so it's legit.
plus you got the
Well, that changes the equation. I didn't know it was tax free.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. He's just kind of like just the goose.
No, we've always said that it's a stack of cash. Like
Oh, okay.
we were
All right,
talking
my
on
bad,
the
my
radio,
bad.
drink somebody else's vomit. Like it's like no, it's your money.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
all of it.
It's right there, cash. You're right. You're right.
I'm a novice of a show, so I didn't know the rules.
Dan, the cool thing about this segment is if it ever gets low enough, we'll try to make it happen. Like if you ever say you'll do something for $200, just don't say it.
Well, see, that's the thing. Like,
We'll make that shit happen, dude.
I gotta give myself some negotiating power here.
Right,
I can't set my price too low because then you'll be trying to give me all kinds of crazy things to do. So,
Fair enough. Hey, put you on the spot before we go. Score predictions.
45-10 Ohio State.
I turned in 45-9.
45. I'm 41-13. I think we're all in the same neighborhood. Dan, thanks so much for joining us, man. Always an easy show when you come on.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks for having me, guys.
As always, take care of each other. Be good to each other. Go Bucks.